There's something about water. It fascinates us and somehow resonates with the various moods we experience. And water can be calm, turbulent. It can be peaceful or exhilarating. Relationships are a bit like that. They have their ups and downs, moments when you feel calm and content, and other times when, well, it's anything but plain sailing. Most of us want to be in a relationship where there is peace and harmony. But that's not always the way it is. Dealing with difference and conflict is a normal part of relationships, of all relationships.
I think conflict expressed in the right way is a good thing. I think conflict as far as if you were chucking stuff at each other and hurting each other and physically abusing or even emotionally abusing someone else, that's not good conflict. But conflict where you say, wait a minute, let's sit down and talk about this and what's your perspective, what's my perspective, do you understand my perspective, I understand your perspective, that sort of a conflict. It's not I don't know if people consider that conflict, but I think that's working out together the differences so that we can move forward as a family.
You can't avoid conflict, no matter what you do. You just can't avoid it. I'm not saying it's great. I look forward to it. No, but you need to see where the other person stands. If you don't have an argument ever, it's kind of like empty. If you don't have disagree, or if you don't have an argument, it's like you don't learn about the other person.
If me and my fiance have had an argument, it always turns out better when we get to, kiss and make up, get to hug and, it feels good after a conflict is over. So generally, I feel like every time there is a little conflict, it feels like we grow a step further in the relationship. So conflict is not necessarily always a bad thing.
We all react to conflict differently. Some of us run from it. Some of us will do anything to avoid it, and still others will enjoy a good fight. And when it comes to our relationships, is conflict a good or bad thing? And what about anger? Is it always destructive? Could it be that conflict is an avenue to deeper intimacy? Well, Dr. Scott Stanley from the University of Denver in Colorado has studied conflict and conflict resolution in marriage. I asked him how important it is for couples to accept that there will be conflict in their relationship.
If there's one thing that in this day and age I think may be more important than anything else for couples to recognize, especially young people, is that you're going to have conflicts. It doesn't mean you don't have a good relationship if you have conflict. Good relationships have conflicts. Good relationships also, though, have a sense that we have a future, so there's commitment that makes it worth doing the struggle and doing the work, and they have the skills to handle the conflicts in a way that they don't damage the relationship and really produce lots of distance over time.
Fetch. Bring here, boy. Drop.
I think when we were first married, because we'd lived apart we hadn't been a couple very much. I was in one part of the world, you in another for a whole year. So getting married was like, oh, I have to get to know this person at close quarters. So there was lots of difference and surprise in terms of conflict, wasn't there?
Yeah. And we certainly did handle conflict very differently. I had grown up with the idea that, well, the naive idea that somehow it was wrong to kind of disagree and that, there shouldn't be any conflict if we had a good relationship. And so it was more like sweeping any differences under the carpet and not kind of dealing with it too much. And so I remember when we first got married, and we did have these disagreements, which were quite horrific to me, that I used to kind of go into this silent mode, and I wouldn't talk to you sometimes for a few hours at a time, and I'd go walking around the house and I'd be then trying to feel good, so I'd start humming to myself. So I'd be going around the house humming but not talking to you, just kind of ignoring you. And I think that was quite frustrating for you, wasn't it? Because you had a different way of dealing with conflict.
Yeah, I come from a large family, and if you want to be heard, especially if the youngest, you have to yell the loudest. So it was pretty obvious to me if I had something to say, it needed to be said, and I wanted to be heard. So it was a very different style. And I also remember that I wasn't really used to having differences with people too much. I'm easygoing, and it was a bit of a shock. We had lots of differences, lots of things to squabble about, and it took us totally by surprise.
Yeah.
And it was quite, oh, how do you deal with this? What's wrong with us? Yeah.
I mean, typically, what do couples fight about? What are the common causes of conflict in marriage?
There's a lot of misconception about where conflict comes in relationships, or some of the main reasons for conflict. It's fairly easy for the average reporter in the media or the average person in a relationship to say something like, money is the biggest cause of all conflict. And the reason why it's easy to say that is money is the thing that couples argue about most, followed closely by children. So those are by far the two greatest argument starters. But having said that, what we have felt for a long time in our work, that the interesting thing isn't so much what people argue about, even though that's important. The interesting thing is how people argue. And how people argue and what they do when they're frustrated tells you a lot more about how a couple's going to do over time than what their actual issues are that they might be needing to talk about or that they argue about.
Hey, honey.
What is this?
What?
When you said I wanted a new surfboard, I didn't realize you'd go out and put it on.
A lot of times, what couples end up arguing about isn't what the argument is really driven by. So let's say a couple has an issue with money. There are lots of money events, and this is probably why money is perceived as the #1 problem area for couples, because money stuff comes up every day. Bills come, checks might bounce, or there might be not enough money to pay this bill versus this bill. So those are all events that then trigger the issue of money. So a lot of couples have conflicts about money because an event about money has triggered the general issue about money. Now, underlying the issues in our model are what we call hidden issues. And by that, we merely mean there's something bigger, usually more emotional, more touching on the heart, or deeper desires in the relationship that really gets triggered by this conflict. So a great case in point is one of the hallmark hidden issues, is feeling controlled or having a conflict about who's got more power. So to put the whole package together, you could have a couple on Thursday night, has a large credit card bill comes, and that's the event. And then that triggers this argument or discussion about money. Should we be budgeting? Why are you spending so much? Why aren't we saving more? But as they get more and more intense emotionally, what the argument actually becomes to be about is who's in control or who has the power. And the couple has a difficult time noticing that their issue has really shifted to that level. And we believe couples actually need to notice that level, or they're not going to get very far on the more surfacey kind of event or the issue that really triggered things in the first place.
I'll pay it.
You better.
Just back off.
It's been really common in this room. I can think of one couple where whenever a partner picked up the mobile phone, the other went into panic and they started to fight. What it was that both of them had been in past relationships where their partners had had affairs that were all done on the mobile phone. So they were reacting not to each other in the now, they were reacting to something that happened years before in previous relationships, or even in the family people grow up in. So when people start finding they're getting reactive, I'd be asking questions about what's the situation in the past that maybe is the same as this that's triggering? Is this reactivity about you two here and now? Or is it about what happened to you, or what even you saw your mum and dad doing 20 years ago? So I think that's an important awareness for people, particularly when it's a quick reaction. Often it's a reaction that's being triggered of a past trauma rather than a presenter. The present is only a symbol that we've bought into.
Okay, so we recognise there are a range of issues that couples argue about. But isn't there a strong emotional component in conflict when people feel frustrated and not understood?
People get angry when they're frustrated, and what they're frustrated about is something's not happening the way they expected, or especially some goal that they have is being blocked. So if you take intimate relationships, people have a lot of expectations and they have a lot of desires. So people can naturally get fairly angry with this person that they're the most attached to and that they love the most because they have a goal, they have a need, they have an expectation. And if that's blocked, it's natural to feel anger out of the frustration of that being blocked.
It's an interesting suggestion that if couples get mad at each other, the relationship won't last. I'd argue if couples don't get mad at each other, the relationship won't last. It's almost like if I'm loving you, at times I'm going to hate you. So if people lock that up, if they don't let their anger be expressed in some way, that's, I think, part of the death of a marriage. I know when I was younger, I used to see marriages that had been together for 30 or 40 years and the only thing they could say to each other was pass the salt and where's the butter, because they weren't allowed to be angry. I remember one man saying, I've been married 50 years and never had an angry word with my wife. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder what sort of words you have had. So to be angry is a part of being a normal human being, and to be angry with a partner is a part of being a normal human being. It's how I allow that anger to be present in a way that we can use it for growth rather than for destruction.
When I've got angry feelings that well up inside me, the thing that works for me is actually have time by myself, to have space. And sometimes it's helpful for me to move away from you. And I sit up in my study and I put my 80s and 70s music on and turn up the volume a bit and even do my checkbook or something like that, which takes my mind totally off the situation, but actually trying to change the situation. Have time to myself to reflect internally about it, and then I calm myself down initially, and then I can focus more on you and what's happening between us. But for me, I need space if I'm really angry.
And for me, I need to release it, and releasing it, you know, as quickly as I can is a good way for me. So I've found just going for a sprint around the block is a good thing. You know, sometimes that can't always happen, but to actually releasing it with, you know, just an expression, going into the bedroom and getting it out, voice-wise, is a helpful thing, so it doesn't end up on my loved one.
Anger for me is, I am more expressive, so I've got two ways of dealing with it. I say what I'm thinking. If I think it's manageable, I don't want to lose my cool, but I talk louder and you know I'm cross or mad. There are times when I just choose to say nothing at all until it kind of cools for me because I don't want to go over the top. Yeah. So I tend to say nothing. I think you probably know I'm not a happy camper, but I'm just keeping it there till I can come out with it. And it might be some time, I might just forget for a while, but I'll come out with it. It sits there, and if we don't express it in some form or another, it's only going to erupt. So I think that it's important to know, I don't want to vent it in a way that's destructive or that I regret later. So if I am able to express it, Cheryl's very patient. And I'm fortunate she can stand back and hear it, and then we can explore the issues. And we do try and find out what's going on here, even if it's not at the time. But I recognise it's time for me to shut up, say nothing, because if I do, I'm going to say far too much.
Anger often is emotion that hides a more vulnerable emotion. So it feels safer to be angry, perhaps, than to feel rejection or to feel the sense that the other doesn't love me anymore or being unsure about that or to feel out of control. Those feelings, rejection, out of control, whatever, are much more vulnerable. And a lot of times, especially when we're in a mode of conflict, we're not feeling emotionally safe. We're not going to express what we feel vulnerable about. But there are a lot of feelings, and they'll get channeled into anger.
I mean, that wasn't good. But how do you think we can afford this house?
Wasn't good?
If I don't do the project, if I don't work long hours...
Oh, because you're such a sacrificial lamb in all this.
I don't like the job. It's just, it pays the bills.
Oh, it pays the bills and I pay some of the bills too. And in the meantime, I look after the kids.
This whole idea that anger often is a marker for more vulnerable feelings is very consistent again with this idea of emotional safety. That at that moment, if you have two partners that feel really good about their ability to communicate and they feel emotionally safe, if one's feeling kind of rejected by what the other has done, they'll find a way to say that in a much more direct way if they feel it's safe to. So the other night when you made that comment about how I spend money, I felt like it moved beyond just about how we deal with money, and I felt like you were rejecting something about me, and that really hurt. You don't see people saying that kind of thing very often unless you have a really great relationship and a great relationship where it's safe to talk. And that's a good example of why it's so important for each couple to find their own way to talk safely.
Sometimes when conflict is happening, it escalates and may even get out of control. So what can we do to make sure it doesn't become destructive to our relationship?
When conflicts between couples escalate, it's usually because both partners are feeling deprived in some way and not heard. So the first task for me as a counsellor is to slow the process down so that people can hear themselves and hear their partner. Because often when a conflict escalates, we start saying things we're not even hearing what we're saying. So for me, the first thing is, to use a jargon term, to invite people to have some dual awareness, to notice myself with what I'm doing with my partner. And even though I'm in conflict with you, I'm noticing myself in the way I'm expressing this conflict.
When it comes to conflict, there is a general belief that men and women approach conflict differently. So what do the experts say about conflict and gender differences?
The question often arises about differences between men and women in handling conflict, and are the differences as great as they appear? And you can get different opinions on this. My view as a researcher is that this is one of the areas where there are truly fairly significant differences on average between men and women. Now, having said that, what people often misperceive, let's say, for example, that on average, women are 2/3 of the time likely the one to bring up an issue and get frustrated about how something's going in a relationship or in the family. And about 1/3 of the time, it's more the husband that might bring up stuff and be frustrated. So from one standpoint, that's a big gender difference. If it's a 2-to-1 difference, that it's more likely that the female's going to raise an issue and therefore look like maybe she's nagging or whatever, that'll be seen as a big issue, and people culturally will sort of understand that women may kind of gripe more than men. What's often misunderstood in that means there's also a lot of relationships, maybe 33% or so just by this example, where it's not that direction at all, and it's much more the guy is usually raising things and pressing things and concerned about things. So there is this difference, but we can talk about it in such a one-sided way. It makes it sound like there's no relationships where guys are the ones raising the issues in conflict, and there's lots of those relationships.
But do we have to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning every
Yeah, I think when it comes to being male and female prototypes or fit to a model, that's probably not really worked, although I acknowledge it's valid and there's lots of studies in the brain, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line for me is I get a bit female on those kind of, which is very embarrassing. And Cheryl can stand back and be perhaps just that, according to some of the prototypes, more male, if it were, although I don't think of it that way. So they do, I think it much more is about the person you are, the personality you have, and the way that you express yourself and the way you do your issues is probably much more important in a relationship than sticking a person into one model or putting them into one or another.
There's some work to do, isn't there?
So, if we become aware that what we are doing during times of conflict isn't working well, is it possible to do things differently? Are there guidelines we can learn to help us when we do get into conflict with one another? Are there any ground rules?
This idea of ground rules is something we think is fairly valuable for couples because it's a way to have couples think about what are we agreeing upon together, you and me, for how we're going to deal with issues in our relationship, how we're going to manage conflicts. One ground rule that couples can agree to, and it's the one that I think is the most powerful of all, if you can get two partners to have an agreement about this, is to agree that they're not dealing with issues at any old time that come up in their relationship, but that they're going to deal with issues at a particular time and place so that they protect the rest of their time together from just issues coming up at random. Events are happening all the time in life. There's just the stream of things going by. So an issue could always be getting triggered in the next moment, but that doesn't mean that's a good time to deal with that issue. Too many couples let the issues define, the events and the issues define when they're dealing with the difficult stuff, as opposed to deciding, let's talk on Saturday morning, for example, at 10 o'clock every week for a half hour about how we're dealing with the budget. That would be a great sort of a ground rule for couples, because then when something gets triggered about Monday on Thursday night, there's the sense that we don't have to wreck Thursday night dealing with money on the spur of the moment when we're not at our best. We've got this time set aside to deal with money constructively. Let's just note that this happened and we'll deal with it Saturday morning. That kind of idea takes a lot of discipline together between partners, but the payoff is huge. There's one other ground rule that we think is one of the most important ones of all, which is the idea of having an agreed upon way from partner to partner to put the brakes on when things are not going well. Every couple escalates. Every couple has times where they get upset. Some couples much more than others, and if it's much more than the average couple, that couple's going to have trouble over time. But we think every couple could benefit from the idea that we have an agreed upon way to call a timeout or to put the brakes on it when we're getting too heated and we're getting upset.
Oh, it's not quite right. Oh, you didn't do it quickly enough. Oh, you should have done that first.
Because you don't do it. I don't understand.
Harsh words generally don't work well. Honesty is good, harshness is not. Because when somebody is harsh to me, then I feel that I'm being attacked, then I want to defend. The more I defend, the more my partner attacks. The more that person attacks, the more I want to defend. That can escalate, and then people can end up doing things that are actually very destructive to the relationship. I think one of the other really, really helpful things that comes out of the research of John Gottman is the idea that people in long-term, healthy, successful relationships initiate what he called repair attempts. So in the middle of a discussion, a heated discussion, a vigorous discussion, or even a fight, what people do in good, healthy relationships is one of the people in that argument will start to make a statement that's a little softer. It may be a statement such as, well, I guess I can see your point about the fact that you've got a lot on your plate right now. But, you know, I've also got a lot as well. So something like that, that may be just enough to lower the intensity a little bit. It softens a little bit. The other person then responds by also softening their response, and the escalation that is so damaging doesn't actually occur.
Ground rules. They're important in playing out our conflicts. We can feel safe and respected. But what role does forgiveness play in relationships and reconciliation? Dr. David Olson of Prepare Enrich has studied relationships, couples and families for over 30 years. This is what he said when I asked him about forgiveness.
We have found forgiveness is a very important process, especially for married couples where they've gone through a lot of turmoil and problems and don't have a lot of trust. In fact, in our Prepare Enrich program this go-round, we have added forgiveness as a scale and as a couple exercise, because we find that that needs to be brought up front and not just superficially dealt with, but each person has to walk through a process of understanding and forgiving each other and saying, what are we going to do different moving forward? And so we have actually a 10-step process that we teach couples and walk through with them when they have a major issue they need to confront. So forgiveness is a very important thing, and that helps build emotional closeness. Going through that experience, people now say, I can trust them more. I feel more connected. And that's what ultimately the goal of forgiveness is all about.
After you've had a conflict, I think as well as needing to hear Heather saying she's sorry, something that works for me is her explaining what she's going to do to stop it happening next time. That really speaks to me that you've actually taken on board what I've had to say and what I'm worried about or upset about. And by you saying, and next time I'll do it a different way, that really helps me to know that the message got through.
For me to hear the words, I was wrong, those 3 words are important to me, to hear the acknowledgement as well as him saying, I'm sorry. The words of, hey, yeah, I stuffed up there is really important.
Many people who are experts in the field of marriage and family relationships believe now that forgiveness is not just part of the package, but it's a crucial part of a really healthy, thriving marriage. And the reason being is that you can't find, or you can find very few marriages or relationships over time where people are not disappointed with the other or haven't hurt each other. Everybody in being committed to another person for a long time, for life, they're going to have periods of time where one's hurt the other or feels hurt by the other, where one's disappointed in the other and feels it acutely. And forgiveness is essential because forgiveness allows one to work toward not holding the partner in a one-down position, because the essence of forgiveness is really deciding, I'm not going to try to get even. I want a healthy relationship with you. I want to reconcile with you, and I'm not going to hold this against you and punish you for something that I think you should be doing differently or that you did that hurt me.
I think sometimes it's very hard to get in the headspace of trying to solve an argument when you're right in the middle of it. But I think you need to discipline yourself and if you can, look at the bigger picture and go, wait a minute, me doing this right now and saying what's really at the top of my head right now isn't the best thing for us as a couple, as a family. It's better for me to go, wait a minute, I'm just going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go and have a cup of tea, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
It's difficult, but it's so much worth just taking a step back, just clearing your head, thinking straight, going back and say, okay, let's deal with this. We can deal with this. Let's do this on a cool, calm, collected level.
Will we resolve all our differences if we use different communication and negotiation skills? Probably not. I asked Doug Sutherland what he thought about this idea.
The only time a marriage has solved all its problems is when they're dead, I think. And because relationships have a life way beyond the couple, even when one of them's dead, the problems of the relationship was probably still there for the widow or widower. Look, there are a percentage of marital problems which are insoluble. They're based on the fact that you're you and I'm me, and we're different. And part of the excitement, I think, of a good long-term marriage is that we recognise that and we keep struggling with them. We keep talking about them, we keep putting them on the table, but not in a way that they're controlling us, but it's almost like eventually we can laugh about it. My classic example is I'm very physical. I, for many years, loved cycling. I rode a push bike to Perth in my 40s. I wanted to get my wife on a push bike with me. I even tried to get her on a tandem. It's not her thing at all. She wanted to go to art galleries and read books. I tried to get her into a dual canoe once. That's not, because my pace and her pace are so different. I mean, she's the most wonderful woman, but our paces are different. That's a problem we'll never solve. And we've resolved it by having our things, and you've got your thing and I've got my thing, and every now and again we still struggle with, oh, but darling, wouldn't you just like to, cycle Tasmania with me or walk across the Simpson Desert with me? And she said, wouldn't you like to come and walk around an art gallery with me for a day or a garden? And so I think that those things are always going to be there, but they become a place for us negotiating and relating and working, so they become almost like the sand in the oyster eventually that creates the pearl. But no, not all problems are going to be solvable. And if they are, you're probably both dead.
There's no running from it. At some point in our relationship, there's going to be conflict. And that's okay. In some cases, it may even deepen our relationship. It's how we deal with it that matters. As Max Lucado wrote, conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional.